have this thing in ecology called shifting baselines where, what you grew up with as a kid, you kind of think that's the healthy normal, and then you see things changing over your lifetime and you're like, oh, when I was a kid it was so much better, there was more birds, there was frogs, but that's completely different to what your parents grew up with, and we're losing this diversity even within my lifetime in most places in Australia.
We recently chatted on Dirty Linen to Pippa James from Grains about their new John Reid Fellowship, funding that goes towards meaningful projects in the world of grain in honour of Redbeard Bakery founder and sourdough pioneer John Reid. John was also a guest on the podcast not long before he died of a brain tumour. The John Reid Fellowship has been split between two people, Shingi Nyabonda, also a Dirty Linen alumni, and today's guest, Jacob Birch. Jacob is a Gamilaraay man who has built his academic career on exploring the promise of native grain. I'm really honoured to have him join us today to talk about reawakening First Nations foodways. Jacob, how's it going?
Hey, Yaamarra. Yeah, I'm good, considering everything. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of everything to consider.
Yeah.
It's hard to know where to start, but I would love to hear anything that you want to say, but do you want to tell us about the work that you're so passionate about?
Yeah. And just acknowledging Grains and the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance and everybody who contributed towards that scholarship or that grant, the John Reid Fellowship or whatever it's called. I met John in the very early conversations that we started having around, reigniting this native grain food system. So he was involved in those really early conversations, and I was really looking forward to catching up with him. And that never happened, unfortunately, because he was such a passionate person and so well articulated and really visionary with it. So but really honoured to get that and sort of keep his vision alive. I guess I'm doing a lot of different things, and there's that academic stuff, that's got its own limitations, and I think the real focus now is stepping into that self-determination space through enterprise development and through nation building activities. So that's the main focus.
And which grains are you working with, Jacob?
So for Gamilaraay mob, we've got two really important species. There's I think over 1,100 native species of grass. So there's so many different grasses that you could work with across the country. Grasses in the dunes, in the on the side of the beach, right through to the desert, up into alpine regions, up into the tropics. So there's a whole variety of grasses, but I'm really focused on using the grains that were important culturally to Gamilaraay people. And that's your native millet, gully, and your Mitchell grass, which is Gamilaraay. and they kind of got two different kind of contexts in using them as well. One's more of a special product and the other one's kind of your daily kind of product.
And are you able to talk about the cultural importance of the grains?
So we're still in the process of bringing all of that knowledge back. Obviously, in our region, compared to some other sort of more remote communities, colonisation was pretty decimating because it's really rich agricultural country, and because it was such rich grassland too. When the first sort of settlers and colonists come through, it was really prized as grazing country. So, you just had this I'm reading an account from the first European female child to enter into that northern Gamilaraay country. So, very, very early days of colonising that country, and she just notes like how fervent that land grab was. It was like a gold rush, but a rush of land, like claiming land for grazing enterprises. So really rapid dispossession, and all those things that come with that. So we lost a lot of knowledge, but I guess just a sort of little bit of that culture behind it. So I live on the Sunshine Coast, Cubby country, and Yaamarra country, and this is big bunya nut story here. A lot of people know the bunya nut as a like a seasonal or not even every year, but like every 3 years, there's like a really big harvest of bunya nut, and that used to support like a congregation of many, many different communities from, sometimes hundreds of kilometres away. Like Gamilaraay people used to walk from, southwest Queensland, northwest New South Wales, all the way into the Bunya Mountains to participate in these gatherings all around that food. You've got this abundance of food, and that supports these gatherings of people, because you imagine like you have hundreds and often thousands of people coming from all around gathering. How are you going to feed all of those people? You can't just go out and hunt kangaroo every day. You'll decimate the population of kangaroos. So these times of food abundance were times to come and gather together, and we had our own like time of abundance, and that was the native grain harvest. So that's why it's really culturally, one of the reasons it's really culturally important. And that there's many, many more reasons that I wouldn't go into, because that's sort of not my story to share. But that cultural gathering stuff, that's really interesting and really exciting that we had our own food system of abundance that would activate, not even every year, when the conditions were right.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to think about that. But yeah, I guess thinking about it now, and as you say, like the violence of colonisation on those very lands is, there's a lot of layers to that discovery. In what ways was this grain consumed?
So sometimes you could just ground it into a paste, like just, some of the grain, a bit of water, ground it into a paste, and they would eat it raw straight up like that. Other times it would be cooked, in like the earthen ovens, or cooked in the coals like a damper. There's other knowledge out there on how to prepare, products that would be more resemblant of a loaf of bread. That was mixing different products into the flour could achieve that same kind of result as a nice risen loaf of bread. Yeah, so it was raw or cooked.
And Jacob, how did you come to start looking at this? As an academic, did the academic side of it come first? Was it something that you were always interested in? Was it something that came through family or family stories?
You could go back and back and back, but like just being out in the sort of garden a lot as a kid, like parents sort of making you do the work out in the garden, and then getting an interest for that kind of stuff, and then moved into an interest in permaculture, but was always kind of asking that question, how can permaculture feed the world? Because cereals are such an important part of the global diet, and we don't really talk about how cereals and cropping fits into that permaculture model. And then did an environmental science degree, marine science degree, and learned about land degradation in Australia. So, looking at just how much country we're losing to things like salination, acidity, erosion. Like soil salinity is consuming like millions of acres of cropping country and viable country. Like, I think by 2050, the figures are astounding. You know, millions and millions of acres lost to salinity. I was like, well, you know, surely there's something we can do about that. And I started looking at native grasses as a soil remediation, because, like I said, we get grasses that grow in sand dunes, and one of those species is kangaroo grass. Like, kangaroo grass grows in the headlands, and you find it in sand dunes. Sometimes it's obviously salt tolerant and really resilient. So why don't we plant something like kangaroo grass in these saline affected parts of Australia? You know, you remediate the country and you can get an outcome, like an economic outcome, if you're grazing cattle or sheep in a sustainable way, obviously. And then from that, just researching that, started learning about using our native grasses as a food source. And then I went and asked my grandmother, and I'm like, did our ancestors harvest grass grain and eat it? Did they use it like flour? And she's like, oh yeah. I was like, well, why didn't anybody tell me this? It's the first time I'm hearing about it. And just from that, the passion for it has just grown. That's so striking, just to think about that, like that journey through, I guess, white academia back to your grandmother, and just like this other way of seeing and feeling and living from the land. It's pretty profound. Yeah, and I don't know, like it makes sense for so many reasons. Like the what we can achieve through this, and why I'm saying like moving into that enterprise development and that nation building work, is because we have a real opportunity with this industry, like this re-emerging industry. Like, it's more than just land remediation or bringing back a food system. We can get a really holistic set of outcomes out of this if we do it right. And that's the main thing, is getting it right from the start and not letting this be appropriated like every other bush food industry in Australia. Like, macadamia is a really good example everybody uses, but, you know, like, we don't acknowledge the seafood industry as a bush food industry. Tea tree is another one that's been taken, lemon myrtle, everything, kakadu plum even, finger lime. We're losing all of these bush food industries that are opportunities to shift paradigms for Indigenous communities. We just have to do it right, and I don't think anybody's going to do it for us, so we have to do it ourselves, and that's setting up those governance structures so that we can lead this space on our own terms.
Wow, that's so powerful. I mean, we've talked before on this podcast about, you know, the sad fact that it's only between 1% and 2% of the money that goes into Indigenous foods goes back to First Nations people. It's just really shocking. But it's really interesting to me that, you know, rather than, I suppose, try to change that with those industries that are already established, that you start this new one. It's really pretty exciting and powerful. I mean, maybe, I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but let's start at the end. Like, what's your, when it's done right, like, what's your vision of this nation building work? Like, what does it look like? What does success look like?
I think my idea of success, like, I'm not sort of too focused on what that would look like, because I really want to co-design that with community. Like for me, it would be seeing like farms, like land, decent land, under ownership of our mob, and being utilised with like traditional methods and producing traditional sort of foods, like bringing back those ways of managing country and getting sort of multiple enterprises operating out of those. So there's so many opportunities with, sustainable forestry and medicines and foods. It's not just the grains. There's a whole myriad of different products like food, fibre, medicine that we can be exploring. But I think sort of one of those guiding visions is just bringing back that health and vibrant diversity to our landscapes. We have this thing in ecology called shifting baselines where, what you grew up with as a kid, you kind of think that's the healthy normal, and then you see things changing over your lifetime and you're like, oh, when I was a kid it was so much better. There was more birds, there was frogs. But that's completely different to what your parents grew up with. And anyway, we're losing this diversity even within my lifetime, and in most places in Australia. But it's so hard to catch a fish in the river now. The rivers are just wrecked. There's no little finches around anymore. I use that as a big analogy. The finches and the Christmas beetle, because the Christmas, that's that shifting baseline. When we were kids, you'd have Christmas beetles every year, but my kids, they won't know anything about having a Christmas beetle every year at Christmas because they've never had it. And then they'll lose something and they'll be like, oh, when I was a kid we had this. But so I want to bring back that, just rambling a bit here, but I want to bring back that vibrant diversity within our landscape, like providing economic opportunities for people, but also getting those environmental outcomes. And I think, it's all experimental at this stage. It could work, it might not, but I think we need to try. And
I guess monocropping has been one of the disasters for land, in all kinds of places around the world. So when you talk about that, are you talking about, let's say, you'll have a native grass, I don't know if plantation's the right word, but an area where you're, keeping an eye on the grasses and sowing from there, but there would be lots of other plants that are interplanted among it. Is that what you're talking about?
I think it's knowing what belongs where. So there would be certain sort of, it might be the soil, it could be the elevation, it could be the topography of the country will sort of tell you what can go where, and knowing what's going to be sustainable within your system too. I'm all for putting a crop of some kind of conventional cereal in, for example, like a crop of wheat, as long as it's done properly. And I've been speaking to farmers who do cropping, but just through changing their methods, they're getting really, really good environmental outcomes. Rivers are running clear again just by changing their practices. And I think it's not the grains themselves, the cereals like wheat and that, it's how it's done. And it's this sort of system we live in. And I say the farmers are between a rock and a hard place where it always comes down to the bottom line, and they do, they don't do the best practices because they got to, pay the bills, I guess. But it's also that system we live in where that's what we demand. I feel like that's what we've always demanded in Australia is economic growth, using agriculture as a tool for economic prosperity. And just reading about recently, in the 1820s when they set up the Australian Agricultural Company, there was people in that colonial administration who were advocating for more sort of decentralised, small-scale, family-owned farms, replicating like actual authentic European style. If you travel particularly continental Europe and places like Italy, you'll see like this agricultural diversity and this small scale agriculture. And we nearly had that in Australia, but instead it was they just ended up going with this large scale agriculture and setting up entities like AACO, founded by 400 of the wealthiest and well-connected people in the British Empire, and that seems like the system we've followed ever since. Is like the top tier of society set the narrative and sort of set the policy and the agenda. I don't know.
Well, you think about that, and that sounds like a very hands-off way of thinking about it. And then you think about you talking about finches or beetles. It's just a very different, I guess, set of priorities that you're looking at when you make decisions. It's definitely a way of there needs to be a lot of rethinking of rethinking about land.
Yeah, and I think like at least trying to bring back these traditional knowledges on how to look at land and how to work with land in a more sort of reciprocal kind of relationship and in a more relational kind of way. Like I think that's possibly the answer that we're looking for, like bringing back our knowledge systems.
And Jacob, going back to salinity, I don't know that much about agriculture and how soil can change. Like, can you just explain how grasses could improve the soil and reduce salinity?
I'm not a soil expert. I'm not really an expert in anything, but we have like fairly shallow water tables in certain areas, and I think the worst saline affected areas are probably like South Australia and WA, and these may even be like your old like inland sea areas where you have these water tables sort of not too deep under the soil that have got a lot of salt in them. So like traditionally trees would have been in the landscape and deep-rooted perennial grasses, and that would have kept the water table deeper, just those deep root systems sucking the water out of the landscape. Because, eucalyptus is really, really good at sucking water out of the landscape, and there's a lot of countries overseas where eucalyptus has been introduced and they're a real problem, causing really dry conditions and drought and all the rest. But they're really effective at sucking that water out and keeping the water table low. But when you denude the landscape of anything long-lived, deep-rooted, the water tables just rise up. And as that water rises, it brings the salt with it. And then you get salt in the soils and you can't really grow anything. So a lot of our native grasses, particularly in those sort of soils, those sandier soils, their root systems will go really, really deep. And these are long-lived perennials. Like our medjool grass, we know that it lives for at least 50 years, but we don't really know how long they live because nobody's ever really studied it. But at least 50 years, and that's because people have observed the same tussock of grass for five decades. Just like this one tussock of grass is just living through all these seasons of boom and bust, drought, flood, fire, just persisting through all of that. So that's what I think. Like, yeah, we have these deep roots and these, multi-layered root systems that it's all providing like a multiple set of services, whether it's keeping that water table down, filtering water, providing habitat for your invertebrates that live in the soil, and your burrowing animals, your microbiology, your cycling of your minerals and elements all through the soil. So there's some multitude of benefits.
Yeah, amazing. And so do you have like commercially viable crops at this point? Like, is that something that you've been working on, or is that still in the planning stages?
That's just in the planning. Like, and again, I think we need to set our structures in place to be able to get that sort of support. I've got support to set up my own sort of individual private business sort of crop somewhere, but I think if we can set up our own sort of nation representative body for our nation, then we can start to look at then getting into growing our own crops. But you need capital to be able to go and put the seed in the ground. Like, you need to be able to buy the seed because we don't have access to country, because like I said, like that Gamilaraay country just got taken up, and it's really prohibitive to try to get land out there. So we're going to have to rely on like probably farmers to grow it for us. Then we'll probably have to buy the seed and then get that seed in the ground. So it's a bit of a process, because these grasses are also, our local varieties, they would be endangered. It's kind of, I've run some community engagement workshops, and people sort of equate the loss of our people and our genetics too, like the way that 2% of the population in Australia, that's probably all that remains of our original populations is 2% after the all the impacts. So there's like this correlation with the loss of the people and the loss of the grasses, but there's now this sort of conscious movement towards bringing them back. But yeah, it's multi-layered and complex.
Yeah, I mean, who do you have on this journey with you, Jacob? Are there a lot of people that are working alongside you in this space, or does it feel like solitary work at times?
There's people doing stuff, but trying to think about this bigger thing. Like, it feels like I am sort of having to drive a lot of that myself, and that's people. I guess that's just because I'm the most passionate one about it, and everybody else has got their own things going on. But like trying to build up a network of Gamilaraay people to at least sort of be the founding kind of members and stakeholders within this entity. I don't have any sort of structures around me for support. So when you get out there and try to advocate for our rights in this space against like massive multinationals and massive institutions, it does feel quite isolating, and just even sort of dealing with conflict, like feeling really abandoned by entities that should have been there to support. So it does at times feel quite isolating.
Yeah, it sounds pretty challenging and draining. What's it like going between, your academic career and things like thinking about, the finches and the beetles and the deep roots of these grasses? I mean, is it about trying to bring the worlds together, or is it about I don't know, like reframing the way that academia approaches these topics?
Honestly, in academia, I'm really just a research assistant at the moment. And there's always that sort of, do I do a PhD? Because I don't have a doctorate. I only ever did honours. a lot of people think I'm a doctor in this space, but I know I'm not. That's why I said I'm not an expert on this stuff. But like, I'm not alone in this. A lot of people are becoming disillusioned with academia. Like, I think there was a real kind of like movement and a moment where Indigenous people were getting into academia, trying to change the system from the inside, and they're finding that they cannot do it. It's just too colonial in its structures, and it's not a safe place to be. There's like, a lot of people are leaving. A lot of people who've been in there who are doing really amazing things are leaving the institutions. People who are doing their PhDs dropping out. Yeah, no, Then there's some high profile people too, like the dean of one of the sandstone institutions recently left. Like, yeah, I feel like it's kind of was an experiment that's failed. And yeah, like, yeah, so it's really, really difficult to work within that space and be bound by it, and like, be censored within that space. Like, even just recently trying to advocate for students and being censored. So it's a really difficult space to work within.
Yeah, it sounds really challenging. Jacob, I know you've been on a trip around the world recently. I mean, have you seen examples of the kind of work that you're trying to do a bit further along the path elsewhere? I mean, are there good examples of First Nations foodways that you can point to or get inspiration and strength from?
Yeah. I just went to a conference in Vancouver, and I did a quick stopover to visit the Anishinaabe people around White Earth Reservation. So it's like the Great Lakes region of Minnesota. And, they've got wild rice there. They got the rice that grows on the water, monoman, they call it. And they've kept that food system alive, despite all the similar kind of impacts that we've had in Australia. They've managed to keep that alive, which is really inspirational in itself. The big trip is next year, but even just this brief one I went on a couple of weeks ago, I only got back a couple of weeks ago. I was there for a week in Minnesota, and yes, it's really, really cool what they're doing there. So I was staying with a lady called Winona LeDuc. She's a bit of a matriarch in that food sovereignty movement. Similar kind of, I don't know, academic but professional kind of background, I think, as an economist or something, and just a really big advocate and activist. And she's been involved in a lot of different entities, and then own private things, and they're asserting sovereignty in that energy space, food. She herself has 3 farms, and they're exploring all different kinds of crops like hemp, the heritage corn, the heritage squash, heritage beans. So that's like the people who did the Three Sisters sort of planning, the beans, squash and corn. But also taking charge of that wild rice industry where they do the processing. So in Australia, like, we don't have the land to access the grains to be able to manage that part of the food system, but we can take control once it leaves the farm gate and be involved in that processing part of it, and then determining what the product's used for from that point. Whereas they have that processing part, but they also have the front end of it as well, which is the harvesting. So because it grows on all the lakes there, and they got like 10,000 lakes out there, it's incredible. I think they say, I don't know if it's true, but they say they have 1/5 of the world's fresh water out there in the Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada, which is incredible. And they have to work really hard to protect those resources too, like whether it's from the coal sand pipelines they were trying to put through, and now they're trying to fight against lithium mining, because everybody wants electric cars now, but they don't sort of think about, well, where's all the materials come from? It comes from like these last wild places, these refuges of usually Indigenous peoples and biodiversity, and places where we get our fresh water. So they got to fight really hard to maintain these resources. But they go out there and they harvest it, and then a morning's worth of work, they can get a few $100 easily. They sell that to the processor. They process it up, and then they package it, brand it, and then they sell it off. So they got control of that whole food system, that traditional food system, but then also like the more contemporary ones too. Like I was saying, the hemp, doing goats and stuff like that. So it's really cool. It was amazing. It's only a week, but it was just like so much in 1 week. Incredible.
Yeah, it sounds really inspiring. And, as you were speaking about before, like there's a lot of diverse land use, which sounds like it would, promote the health of those environments. Although in the face of those pressures that you also speak about, does that give you energy for the tasks you've set for yourself back here?
Yeah, but also like when you see people like Winona and just like these force of energy where it's like, someone like that, they can achieve those kinds of things. I'm like, oh God, I'm exhausted just being around this person, because and she's like, she's a lot older than me too. So yeah, it's inspiring, but I'm also like, oh geez, do I have that kind of energy? But I think for me, like what I want to do is use these examples to inspire my own community, to say like it is possible, and these people are achieving it, and they've had similar experiences, and forming these like relationships of learning and sharing and standing in solidarity together. Just so I think it's bringing more people into it to spread the load, so and build the movement.
Yeah, it sounds very necessary and essential and worthwhile. Jacob, can you describe for us a place where there is a landscape in harmony, and what it looks like and what it feels like to be there on Gamilaraay country?
It would have to just be, I would have to try to envision that, because it doesn't exist in reality at the moment, and it hasn't existed in my lifetime. So I'll be dreaming it into existence. We won't be speaking to it from experience, because it's just been so decimated. But from a plant perspective, like, we're really fortunate in that we have so much medicine on our country, like so many different medicine plants, and those plants are not just medicine because of their bioactive components, but also like on a spiritual level, almost like they're kind of like sharing something if you allow yourself to sort of connect. And I guess especially a lot of women too really connect with the plants, but it'd be seeing all of these like really beautiful sort of reciprocal relationships between people and plants out there on country, and seeing like a real diverse assemblage of grasses within the landscape, like seeing the little grassland birds kind of like darting in and out of the grasses. You don't see that much anymore, but you get all these finches and wrens and robins sort of dancing through the grass. And out on that sort of northern part of Gamilaraay country is wombat country, but we don't really have wombats out there anymore. It would be seeing the return of the wombat and seeing like all of our, the return of like your big mobs, emu and your red kangaroo, your plains turkey, which nearly got wiped out. Be seeing the return of all your sort of, what I've seen in Minnesota, which I hadn't seen for so long, was the place was alive with insects, like just the diversity of insects. Like I remember as a kid, you'd have to watch out walking through a garden because you'd get spiders or some kind of insect. And now it's not so much, but there was just, it was buzzing and it was alive. And I'd love to see that again out there. This landscape that was alive, that you can feel the energy within it. And that's not sort of dead and denuded and covered in chemicals and synthetic fertilizers, where the rivers are all stagnant and, like it'd be, I don't know, like it's hard to kind of explain, I guess, without sitting down and really envisioning it.
Oh, you've done an amazing job just sketching it out. It sounds like a very rich place and, very special place that's full of, opportunities and meaning and, things that it could say to us. It's pretty powerful. Jacob, is there anything we haven't touched on today that you would like to talk about or you'd like to say?
No, I think that's covered a lot of ground, and there's so much to say, but at the same time, I think just at the moment, with recent sort of things that have happened, it's a lot of people are just really burnt out. Feeling really high emotion. So I don't think we need to go too deep into anything else, like, unless there's something you wanted to sort of touch on.
Well, I really feel that that drain and all the energy that so many First Nations people put into campaigning for a voice to Parliament, and even if they didn't, whatever views they had, there was a lot of it took a lot of energy from a lot of people. And when we hear from you directly about the challenges and the difficulty and the energy that you already have to put into this incredibly important and worthwhile work, to think that something imposed upon people such as yourself that takes more energy and not even for the outcome that so many people were hoping for, I just find that really distressing. So, I don't know if sorry is a useful word, but I feel really bad about it.
No, I think it. I'm hoping that it's a moment. I'm hoping it's. Hoping that it's that moment that sort of catalyzes people. it kind of brings it all out and showcases it to the world. I guess like some of the difficulties First Nations people deal with on a daily sort of basis. And, you know, like I'm in a, you know, I don't have to deal with that constant kind of racial profiling because I blend in more than others. But you know, you ask anybody who has darker skin and distinctive Indigenous features what their daily life is like, and they'll tell you, you know, they can't go anywhere without being followed by security guards, being racially profiled everywhere they go. And it just, that's what they have to deal with every single day. And I think it's shown the world that reality, this result. You know, and you can see some places, they say it's not racially motivated, but when you look at some regions where only 20%, less than 20% have voted yes, and then somewhere else 60% have voted yes, well, what's the difference? Why did 40% decide that no was the right answer if it wasn't racially motivated? What do you know? And these are usually regional towns. It's like, who voted no, and then inner city suburbs voted yes. It's like, well, you know, are you in the country more enlightened than the person in the city? Do you know something that they don't, that you voted no? Are you privy to some kind of secret conspiracy, or is it just that it's more racist? And I think, you know, I hope that kind of, yeah, it makes people realise how difficult it can be for people who are Indigenous in this country. You know, because they know they have to live with that every day, but yeah, I think now the world knows. So I'm hoping this will be a moment to sort of catalyse some kind of change. And I think like it has to be led, you know, by the communities. Like I really think like that's why we need to start looking at that nation building work, because if we're going to do something, we're going to have to do it ourselves. We're going to have to be able to set our own structures in place so that we can equitably negotiate with, you know, these government bodies or whatever to lead better outcomes. And eventually through that nation building work, you can then start to take control of those things so that you're not a fully serviced community anymore, serviced by the government and private contractors. You're delivering the services for your community. And that's kind of what the nation building work is about.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I know you were very much on this path, you know, for a while. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of listening to be done, and I hope you're right that this is a moment of change. You know, yeah, and people are looking at, or non-First Nations people can look at, yeah, what kind of reckoning can be done. Yeah. Jacob, I'm really grateful to your time and for putting the energy into this conversation. It's going to mean a lot to a lot of people, I think, and definitely so much to think about. All power to you with your work and the nation building that I've got no doubt you'll forge ahead with. Thank you so much for chatting today.
No, I appreciate that. I hope it was worthwhile for everybody listening and for yourself. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was life-changing, I reckon. But I thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This